Welcome to CityWorks, a co-production of the City University of New York School of Labor and Urban Studies and CUNY TV. I'm Laura Flanders. Every month, CityWorks explores the challenges and lived experiences of working people on the job, at home, and in our communities. On today's show, immigrant workers in dangerous jobs, sometimes with tragic consequences. We have a special SLU report. Foreign-born workers have always played an important role in the New York City workforce. Today, they account for more than 40% of city workers, more than double the national share. And they do the city's most dangerous jobs, such as construction, where they're especially vulnerable to exploitation, especially at non-union sites. After one too many avoidable deaths, workers themselves, their advocates, and lawmakers have been coming together in the city and the state to strengthen the rights and protections of workers and hold exploitative bosses to account. On today's CityWorks, we have a special report on one group of mostly Guatemalan migrants who scored an important victory for worker safety this year. And in studio to discuss this issue, we have two distinguished experts, immigrants' rights and labor activist, New York State Assemblymember Catalina Cruz. She represents Assembly District 39, the most diverse district in the nation. It encompasses the neighborhoods of Corona, Elmhurst, and Jackson Heights in Queens. She currently serves as the chair to the Task Force on New Americans in the New York State Assembly, where she advocates on behalf of immigrants statewide. Assemblymember Cruz is a former immigration lawyer and the first dreamer to be elected to the state legislature. We're also joined by labor rights attorney and lobbyist Richard Winsten, who has helped push through a number of important pro-worker and human rights bills in New York, as well as journalist Amir Khafagy, Report for America Corps member covering labor and immigration for the news site Documented, and our reporter on this story. Why don't you kick things off, Amir? Introduce this piece we're going to see. You've been working on this story for a while.
I've been working on this story for years, really. I've been covering the plight of migrant workers in New York City who've been working hard to try to elevate their lives and improve their working conditions. Things have really took a toll since the beginning of the pandemic. Many workers were realizing that they were indeed essential workers, and they were wondering to themselves, how can we make things better for our lives and our families? Workers in New York have been constantly under threat. Conditions have been getting worse and worse. Deaths and injuries are increasing. So a group of workers taking advantage of a new law under the New York HEROES Act, a new provision of that law in which allowed them to form workers' safety committees as a new tool in which they can organize to make safer workplaces. So here in this story, we were able to document the rise of this movement, what it took to organize a workplace safety committee, and what it takes to win.
We're going to play the package that we produced here at the School of Labor and Urban Studies, and when we come back, we'll hear more of the details behind what you're going to see. Take a look.
New York is in the middle of a construction boom, but yet workers continue to die at construction sites in record numbers. Every year, we memorialize fallen workers at events like this, but yet it seems like workers keep dying. What is it going to take to stop the dying? My name is Amir Khafagy, and I'm a reporter with the CUNY School of Labor and Urban Studies, and we've been looking into it.
We have breaking news. A wall collapses in Lower Manhattan, killing a construction worker. 3 others are injured.
19-year-old construction worker is dead after apparently being run over by a lift.
And breaking right now at 4, a deadly accident inside a Brooklyn building. The first floor that's under construction collapsed, killing a worker.
New York City's construction industry is notoriously dangerous, especially for immigrant workers on non-union construction sites.
In New York State, Latino workers are more likely to die on the job than other non-Latino workers. And those who are Latino and immigrants are more likely to be exploited.
In 2022, according to the New York Committee for Occupational Safety and Health, 24 construction workers died on the job, for reasons including inadequate safety training, lax enforcement of safety regulations, and the prioritization of profits over worker well-being by some construction companies. Wilson Diaz, who came to New York from Guatemala, has worked in construction here for 4 years.
I remember that one time we were working in a basement, but in that basement there had been some demolition done, and the other workers had made holes for the pipes. And on that particular occasion, the manager was there, and it was dark, completely dark. And we were all working in that place, and I was walking, and suddenly my left foot fell into a hole. And the manager noticed, but he didn't say anything. And I was left with an injury in that knee, which I still have to this day.
The workers were also routinely without safety equipment required by law.
They would make us work in the scaffold area without any personal protective equipment. We didn't even have a harness.
Part of the problem is the rampant use of labor brokers who hire workers and outsource them to non-union work sites. After a worker for one of these brokers fell to his death in 2021, Wilson and a group of fellow demolition workers, mostly indigenous Guatemalans, started organizing to demand that their employer, Best Super Cleaning, increase their wages and provide a safer workplace. Best Super Cleaning did not respond to multiple requests for comment on this story. Despite a 2022 amendment to the New York Health and Essential Rights Act giving all workers the right to form a workplace safety committee and requiring employers to recognize those committees or face fines, Best Super Cleaning refused to respond to their workers' demands. In response, Wilson and his colleagues launched a public campaign. It took more than a year, but finally, with the assistance of the Laundry Workers Center and progressive Jewish groups such as Jews for Racial and Economic Justice, in January 2024, Best Super Cleaning finally agreed not only to recognize the Workers' Workplace Safety Committee, but also to provide the proper tools and safety equipment the work required. Now the Best Super Cleaning workers hold regular meetings to air their concerns. And if workers feel a particular job is dangerous, they have a right to refuse.
Now we can talk about what we need to stay safe. We're not putting ourselves at risk anymore. We can talk about these issues if we're in danger, if we're putting our lives or security in danger. Not just me, but my fellow workers as well.
The struggle's not over. Back at the memorial marking Fallen Worker Day, Lowell Barton, Vice President and Organizing Director of Laborers Local 1010, says that while law, training, and awareness are important, we still need a fundamental change in the culture.
I think more concern got to be happening on every job site about the concern and safety of every single worker. Until that's a priority with making money, worker safety, it's never going to change. When worker safety becomes more important than making money on a job, then it will change.
Organizing can be difficult. Still, the struggle's worth it, says Wilson.
I want to say to people who perhaps at some point have felt afraid or are afraid of losing their job, well, go ahead and lose it. Because we know very well that we have rights and that we can pressure the company and make sure our opinions in the workplace are heard.
For the CUNY School of Labor and Urban Studies, I'm Amir Khafagy.
We're going to talk more about what's in the piece, but I want to come to you, Assemblymember Cruz. I mean, you'd like to say that this is shocking information, but it's clearly not. I mean, these conditions have been enduring for a very long time. Are you seeing change? Are you seeing that there's more consciousness, at least, to this problem?
I think what we're seeing, Laura, is our immigrant community coming to a place of understanding what their rights are. They might still choose not to exercise them. I've seen that happen often out of fear for their status, wanting to keep the job, wanting to not raise too many flags. But people are knowing now, you know, with social media, with WhatsApp groups, the word is getting around more and more that things like fake OSHA cards are not the way to go, that you don't have to stay quiet if your wages are stolen or if you're not given the proper equipment, that there are places where you can go and get help.
Let's talk about that OSHA cards thing. So the Occupational Safety and Health Administration issues cards to people that will give, that they have to have if they're going to have certain jobs. that should mean that they've gone through the appropriate training, but it doesn't always mean that, right? Amir, your reporting's looked into it.
There's a lot of scams out there. There's a lot of organizations, especially like where I live in Jackson Heights on Roosevelt Avenue, where there's these OSHA schools, and they say, hey, we can get you an OSHA card, and they'll charge these workers $500, $600, $700, and these cards are worthless, and they don't have the safety training. So when they do go on these job sites, a lot of them are prone to injury or even death.
Now, Richard, you worked with the New York Injured Workers Bar Association as an attorney. What did you see in that capacity?
Well, I mean, a lot of what was described in the piece, and I also work with New York Committee on Occupational Safety and Health, which does a lot of great work in the area of migrant worker construction. They issue the annual report. They send out industrial hygienists. They do prevention work. They do actual classes that enable people to get those OSHA cards, not these phony scams. And we do it, language sensitive. So, we do a lot of work in this area, and that work is supported, frankly, by the New York State Legislature, by great legislators like Ms. Cruz, who provide funds to NICOSH and to the Occupational Health Clinic Network that actually can provide these services in an honest and sensitive way. So that doesn't just happen. That happens because you have people in state government who get us the funding so that we can deliver the service.
What's your relationship? Like, how does the relationship between outside activist groups or trade unions and legislators work when it works well?
Look, I think Carlos's law is a great example of how it works when it works well. You had the unfortunate death of a worker who was on a construction site who was not provided with the safety equipment and whose employer was not held accountable the way that he should have because the law had not caught up to the idea of employers using, frankly, the death of workers as just one more thing that happens in their business. Pay off their small fine and they keep it moving and they open up another shop under the same conditions. What happened there was workers, unions, and elected officials, as well as law enforcement, coming together to pass a piece of legislation that drastically changed how we hold these kinds of employers accountable. And so, you have this relationship of cooperation with the understanding that ultimately the workers who are going to benefit are going to be low-wage workers, more often than not immigrant workers, and generally non-unionized workers, because thankfully with unions, you have a recourse. But it's these non-union workers who are often left without any other resource, and that's where we all come in and work together.
And the story that you brought to my attention, Amir, that I wasn't aware of, was the role being played by these kind of intermediary, you call them body shops, like the one in the story, Best Super Clean. Describe those. Who are they? What do they do?
They're strange companies. They function as labor brokers essentially. They're not the ones doing the job, working on the job sites. They're the ones supplying workers to different job sites across the city. And that's what makes it hard for a company, for agencies like OSHA to do any regulatory jobs on these companies, because every day the job site's different. Workers working in Manhattan one day goes to Queens another, goes to Brooklyn another, and they don't care about the workers' safety. They don't care about the workers' bodies, essentially. That's why they call them body shops. They push them in and they push them out like an assembly line.
I mean, the stories we heard were horrendous. I mean, it wasn't just the one in the basement, although I thought that was pretty horrendous, but also the one that died being up on scaffolding without harnesses, without any way to keep themselves safe, sometimes tying themselves to one another.
Yeah, they tether themselves. They try to find ways to make the workplace safer for themselves. So they tether themselves. They can literally connect each other. One's on the ground, another's 7 stories up, and they're holding the other worker. And that's how they make their workplace safe. They don't even get gloves. Some of them have to bring their own tools. It's a really sad and ridiculous loophole in the law that we have to look into.
Well, it sounds like people are looking into it. Richard, what do you think is the next kind of frontier for legal change on this front?
Well, there's so much that could be done. We have, I'll give you for instance, there's federal OSHA, but federal OSHA doesn't cover certain occupations. And so for those occupations, New York State can act and create safety standards and safety committee requirements and things like that. And so when we're talking about occupations like nail salon workers, let's say, or deliveristas in some cases, it may be that the state needs to step in and do that standard setting and occupy the field that OSHA doesn't occupy. And I think that there needs to be more attention paid to that at the New York State level. And that can be done by the legislature and the governor. It also, incidentally, can be done by the Commissioner of Labor by regulation, if they choose to do that. But one way or the other, I think more attention needs to be paid to that. And those occupations are occupations that migrants are filling. And we need to pay attention to it for that reason.
And when New York acts, that can lead a nation.
And it has before. You
often do. Yeah.
When Richard and I actually met was when I worked as the head of the Exploited Workers Task Force, which frankly I'd like to see it make a comeback. Yeah. It was a coordinated effort between state agencies, also working with local entities to ensure that we were passing legislation, implementing legislation, and enforcing the law, especially in these industries that are often seen as low-wage industries where workers are ripe for exploitment because they're in need. They're in need of a salary, they're in need of work, so they'll stay quiet and won't stand up for their rights. And that's where government has the duty to step in, and we have before, and we should again.
All right, well, we're going to come back and talk about more of what's on the slate for the future and what needs to be done right now. But right now, we're going to take a quick break. You are watching CityWorks. Welcome back to CityWorks. We're talking about immigrant workers who are facing increasingly dangerous work environments and what is being done to protect them. We're here with New York State Assemblymember Catalina Cruz, labor attorney Richard Winsten, and documented reporter Amir Khafagy. Amir, again, you have been looking into these stories for Documented, which covers the immigrant population here in New York City. We've talked about the importance of lawmaking, of legislating, of attorneys, of activists. Media play a big role here. What difference are you seeing media make?
When we cover stories around workers organizing themselves, they're not, workers who are not in unions, workers that don't have access to the same resources that workers who are born here have, we're elevating a whole new class of workers and a whole new movement of workers that are really fighting to make workplace safer for everybody, right? Workers are organizing workplace safety committees, and when they don't belong in unions, they don't have access to the union benefits and the union protections, so they take advantage of what exists in the law and they organize themselves. We're documenting workers who are creating WhatsApp groups where they're connecting with each other. They're finding each other, especially workers around wage theft,
Well, one of the groups that modeled exactly that, novel ways of organizing, was the domestic workers who didn't have a workers' hall. They didn't all meet together in a union facility, but they figured out how to organize even though they were working in independent people's homes, and it was not easy, but they did it. You were part of that, Catalina.
For the movement of workers to have gone from the standard unions to seeing workers in someone's home, because they have no way of knowing each other, talking to each other, understanding their rights, to come together. It was a drastic change that I think was later picked up by other groups of workers in similar situations. We're now seeing it with the nail salon workers. And I even think, a segment of the construction workers is doing that now, which are the day laborers. These are workers that generally have no way to connect and found, whether it's a parent entity, if you will, or even just a well-meaning reporter who connected everyone, and they're now creating the kind of change that we've been fighting for decades for their industry.
And as we're implying, but just to say it outright, you know, we believe here, based on our reporting, that justice trickles up. Like, if we can change things at the base, it changes it for everybody. And that's a little bit of a twist on the traditional labor model, which was you get the biggest number of workers in the biggest industries to set a standard for the nation. It hasn't always helped people who fell outside those criteria. Richard, how do you think about how change happens, given your long career in this business?
Well, change happens when you have, I would call it a movement around demanding that change. You know, when we did the public employee OSHA law in New York State in 1980, and after that, we created the Occupational Health Clinic Network in the mid-'80s, and a huge grant program for safety and health. I mean, that came from a combination of legislators on the inside who worked very hard for it, governors who supported it, health commissioners who supported it, activists like myself on the outside. You know, there was a real sort of movement feeling. Unfortunately, you know, down the road, a lot of that has been lost, and I'm trying to, with others, fan the flames to recreate that, and hopefully we can do that again. This year, we won an additional $5 million for the Occupational Health Clinic Network with the help of people like Assemblymember Cruz, and that was a big breakthrough, and that's going to enable us at the Mount Sinai Clinic to hire some specialists to treat essential workers who came down with COVID on the job, and many of them were able to go back to work, but 15% have long COVID and can't go back to work. And they need neurological care, cardiology, mental health. And unfortunately, at the moment, they can't really get that in the city because you don't have specialists authorized by the Workers' Compensation Board in adequate numbers to treat them. So we're going to try to hire some of them at Sinai and get them authorized with the additional money that we hope to get. So, you know, it's things like that that have to be put into motion and be accomplished. You know, if these people are essential workers, and they are, we got to treat them with the respect that essential deserves.
It's an election year. One of the candidates is, you know, very clear about where he stands on worker rights, immigrant rights. He's against them, basically. Are you worried yourself? And are you seeing the people you're reporting worried about what could happen this coming year? Not that things have been rosy right now, but it could only get worse.
What I see is that workers are worried every day.
Well, that's true.
They're worried every day. They don't know what's going to happen to them tomorrow. So it's hard for a lot of them to even think about what's going to happen next year. I know a lot of, with asylum seekers right now, they're desperate for work permits. And this administration's really dragging its feet to even help elevate them to a status in which they could legally work and then have the rights. But as long as they remain without a work permit, they're more vulnerable to sketchy employers who are going to take advantage of them, pay them less, and put them in more dangerous situations.
You've been working on that very issue.
On the issue of making sure people could get to work, we introduced legislation to try to circumvent the federal government. We'll see where that ends up. But also on the issue of safety. You know, I think getting folks educated and funding organizations like NICOSH and the clinic is key in ensuring that that happens. We are the government. We can't do that piece of the puzzle, but we have to push for funding. We have to increase it. And we have to make sure that workers know what their rights are. Ultimately, the reality is we don't know what's going to happen come November, but we can't sit and wait around and not be prepared for it.
But worker permits for asylum seekers is something that you can achieve in the state.
Yes, I'd like to call my bill constitutionally adjacent. The reality is the federal government has the power to provide, and the power is solely with them. But my view is we're in an emergency. If the federal government is not doing its role, the courts have said in emergencies, the states can step in, and that's what I aimed to do with our legislation. But again, this is one of those things that when we see an emergency right in front of us as a society, we want to get it done. Last year, when we introduced it, we had momentum. And then the federal government came in and said, we're going to give workers permits to a portion, not to everybody who needs it, but to a portion, and we're going to speed it up. They didn't really speed it up for everyone.
For Venezuelans was singled out, right?
But we have people coming from all over the world, and even the entire population of Venezuelans wasn't given the work permit. And so now you have all of these folks who are one and second tier migrants at this point because of how the government has set up its process, and people still need to work. And in the meantime, they're going to go and get deliverista jobs without the proper helmet and training. They're going to go get construction jobs without the proper training and credentials, and they're going to get injured and die. And what are we going to do?
If you want to see some of our coverage with the deliveristas and the nail salon workers, check out our archives online at City Works. What's the next issue you're working on, Assemblywoman?
Well, I am right now looking at implementation. You know, I think that unfortunately that's one thing legislators often don't get a chance to do. I want to make sure that the Wage Theft Accountability Act is being implemented the right way, that the various district attorneys are doing what they need to do. And when it comes to legislation, I've been working for a couple of years with the nail salon workers on passing legislation that basically codifies what we did with the task force a couple of years ago when it comes to health and safety, training requirements, etc. It's been difficult, especially because the pandemic, hit so many small businesses hard, and there's no appetite right now to tackle anything that will put more of a financial strain in these small businesses. But I'm going to keep pushing, because my duty is to these workers and to making sure that they are heard and that they're protected.
Well, I want to thank you all. Assemblywoman Cruz, thank you for your work. Amir Khafagy and Richard Winsten, thank you so much for joining us. That is it for CityWorks. If you have comments or questions, write to us at cityworks@slu.cuny.edu. For CityWorks, I'm Laura Flanders. Thanks for watching.